I never believed in curses until I moved to Hollow Creek. As a new teacher in this isolated, fog-shrouded town, I thought I was escaping the chaos of the city. But Hollow Creek has its own chaos, an eerie, suffocating darkness that seeps into everything. It starts with the rules, strange, impossible rules the school enforces with deadly seriousness. Break them, they say, and you'll disappear just like the ones before. The dense fog clung to the twisted trees, curling like ghostly fingers around the rusty iron gates of Hollow Creek. I had never heard of this town before the job offer. I wasn't even sure how they had found my application. Yet here I was, staring at the old, weathered sign that read, "Welcome to Hollow Creek," a quiet place to call home. The irony wasn't lost on me. My car's engine coughed and sputtered as I pulled into the gravel parking lot of the only school in town, Hollow Creek Elementary. The building stood like an ancient monolith, its gray, crumbling bricks blanketed with moss, and the windows glinting like soulless eyes in the mist. I shivered, wrapping my coat tighter. Stepping out, I was immediately greeted by a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a rigid smile. "You must be Miss Foster," she said, extending a cold, bony hand. "I'm Principal Hardgrove. Welcome. I trust your journey was uneventful." There was something in her tone, a strange formality that felt unnatural. Inside, the school was dimly lit, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long shadows on the cracked, tiled floors. Children's laughter echoed faintly from distant halls, but the sound was hollow, almost mechanical. "We like to maintain a sense of order here," Principal Hardgrove continued, leading me down the winding corridors. "There are rules, you see, rules we take very seriously." She stopped abruptly in front of a bulletin board, where a faded sheet of paper was pinned, titled "The Rules of Hollow Creek School." Beneath it, the rules were neatly typed. 1. Students must be in their seats 5 minutes before class begins. 2. No one is allowed in the East Wing after 4 p.m. 3. Never acknowledge the girl in the blue dress. 4. If you hear whispering from the closet, do not open it. 5. Under no circumstances should any teacher leave before 5 p.m. My eyes lingered on the third rule, the girl in the blue dress. I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Principal Hardgrove's face tightened. "You will follow the rules, Miss Foster. Break them, and there will be consequences." The rest of the day was a blur of introductions and an unsettling sense of being watched. My classroom was an old, musty room with creaking floors and pale, flickering lights. The children were quiet, too quiet. They sat with their heads bowed, speaking only when spoken to, their voices hushed, their eyes dull. One student stood out to me, a small, pale boy with dark, sunken eyes who sat in the back row, scribbling in a worn notebook. His name was Daniel. When I tried to speak to him, he looked at me, his voice a whisper. "They'll come for you too, if you break the rules." I laughed nervously. "Who will come, Daniel?" But he just shook his head, burying his face back in his notebook. The hours passed slowly, the oppressive air thick with an unexplainable heaviness. At 3:45 p.m., the bell rang, and the children shuffled out like ghosts. I stayed behind, trying to organize my desk, but the gnawing feeling of being watched never left me. By 4:10 p.m., the hallways were silent. I glanced at my watch, then at the empty corridor outside my classroom. Shadows seemed to twist and writhe beneath the flickering lights. And then a faint, rhythmic tapping echoed from down the hallway, the East Wing. I remembered the rule. No one is allowed in the East Wing after 4 p.m. A shiver ran down my spine. Maybe it was a janitor, I reasoned. But the tapping grew louder, almost frantic. My curiosity won, and I stepped into the hallway, walking toward the sound. The corridor seemed to stretch, the walls narrowing, the lights dimming with every step. At the end of the hall stood a door, aged and peeling, with a rusted handle. As I reached for it, I heard a faint whisper, a soft, desperate voice on the other side. "Help me. Please help me." Fear gripped me, but I forced myself to call out, "Hello, is someone there?" The whispering stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. Suddenly, the door rattled violently, the handle twisting as if someone were trying to escape. Panic surged through me. I turned to run, but the hallway was now shrouded in darkness. I stumbled forward, the oppressive air closing in on me. My heart thundered in my chest. Somehow, I made it back to my classroom. Slamming the door shut, I leaned against it, gasping for breath. My watch read 4:15 p.m. I grabbed my bag and rushed for the exit. As I neared the front door, I saw Principal Hargrove standing there, her cold eyes piercing through me. "Did you go to the East Wing, Miss Foster?" Her voice was eerily calm. I shook my head, trying to steady my breathing. "No, I just lost track of time." Her gaze lingered on me, a thin smile curling at her lips. "Be careful, Miss Foster. The rules are there for your safety." Outside, the mist had thickened, curling around the twisted trees. I hurried to my car, fumbling with the keys, desperate to escape. As I drove through the suffocating fog, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, I saw her, a little girl in a blue dress, standing in the middle of the road, her empty, hollow eyes staring after me. Sleep didn't come easily that night. My tiny, damp apartment in Hollow Creek felt like a tomb. The fog outside pressed against the windows, thick and impenetrable, and even the comforting glow of my bedside lamp seemed swallowed by the darkness. Every creak of the old building made me jolt awake, heart pounding. I tried to rationalize what I had seen: the girl in the blue dress, a trick of the fog, a lingering nightmare. But the chill that had settled deep in my bones was too real. Something was wrong with Hollow Creek. And those rules, they weren't just a strange tradition. They were a warning. The next morning, I forced myself to return to the school, telling myself that I was being paranoid. But the unease only grew as I walked through the mist-shrouded streets. The town itself seemed wilted, peeling paint, twisted trees, and windows covered with thick curtains, as if the residents were hiding from something. When I entered the school, the air was cold, the hallways dimmer than before. My students sat quietly at their desks, their eyes dull, their movements slow. Even Daniel, the pale boy in the back row, seemed quieter than usual, his gaze locked on his notebook. I tried to focus on a lesson, but the whispers began, faint, barely audible, but constant. I looked around, but the children were silent. It felt like the walls themselves were murmuring. At lunchtime, as the children filed out, I called Daniel to my desk. He hesitated, then approached, his small, trembling hands clutching his notebook. "Daniel," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yesterday, you mentioned that they'll come for me if I break the rules. What did you mean?" He looked over his shoulder, fear etched on his pale face. "They always do. It started with the girl in the blue dress, then the others. They made the rules to keep her away, but she finds the ones who don't follow them." My heart raced. "Who finds them, Daniel?" "She does. But not just her. The others she's taken, they're part of her now. A sudden chill washed over me, and I felt a shadow loom at the door. Principal Hargrove stood there, her expression as unreadable as ever. Miss Foster, a word. In her office, the air was suffocating. A pale, faded portrait of a somber-faced man stared down at me from above her desk. His eyes seemed almost alive. "I thought we had an understanding, Miss Foster," she began, her voice a thin blade. "The rules are clear for a reason." I tried to keep my voice steady. I didn't mean to. "Curiosity is dangerous here," she interrupted. "The rules keep the darkness at bay. Break them, and you invite it in." "Who is the girl in the blue dress?" I blurted out. Her expression darkened. "You've seen her." It wasn't a question. "Then you must be especially careful now. She knows you." I leaned forward, desperation choking me. "Principal Hargrove, please, just tell me the truth. What is this place? Why the rules?" She sighed, leaning back in her creaking chair. "Once, this was an ordinary town, but the forest to the east, there are things that dwell there. Things we should never have crossed. It began with that girl, Emily Harper. She vanished one stormy night near the woods. Days later, she returned, or something wearing her face did. The rules were created to keep her, and the darkness she brought at bay." My skin prickled. "And the other children? The ones who disappear?" Her gaze turned cold. "Not just children, Miss Foster. Teachers, visitors, anyone who breaks the rules. They become part of her." Panic clawed at me. "Then why not leave? Why does anyone stay here?" "Some tried. They never got far. The fog always brings them back." Her voice softened, almost pitying. "And now that you've seen her, she will come for you." I stumbled out of her office, the walls closing in around me. The whispers grew louder, twisting through the corridors like a breeze. I couldn't stay here. I needed to leave. I rushed to my classroom, grabbed my bag, and practically ran out of the building. But as I neared my car, a familiar voice stopped me cold. "Miss Foster, wait." Daniel stood by the gate, his eyes wide with terror. "You can't leave now. Not like this. She'll follow you." "Daniel, please, just tell me how to escape this place." I begged. "You can't. Not unless—" He hesitated, his voice barely a whisper. "Not unless you take someone's place." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What do you mean? One in, one out? If she takes you, she lets someone else go." His voice trembled. "It's the only way." My thoughts raced. "That's why the teachers stay. That's why no one leaves. You understand now," he whispered, backing away. "I'm sorry, so sorry." He turned and ran, disappearing into the fog. My mind spun. I fumbled with my car keys, desperate to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. Panic surged, and I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, tears burning my eyes. The mist outside thickened, swirling like a living thing. I saw shadows shifting in the fog, shapes pressing against the mist's edge. And then, there she was, the girl in the blue dress. Her face pale and empty, her hollow eyes staring directly at me. Suddenly, something cold gripped my wrist. I looked down. An icy, spectral hand was reaching through the window, clawing at my arm. I screamed, struggling, but the fog thickened, the whispers now a deafening roar. I yanked the door handle, tumbling out of the car. The fog swirled, and I ran, my feet pounding against the wet gravel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The school loomed ahead, and without thinking, I sprinted toward it. The door slammed shut behind me, but the whispers didn't stop. They pressed against the walls, against the windows. Then silence. My knees buckled, and I sank to the cold, cracked floor, gasping for air. I was trapped. Hollow Creek had me now. That night, I stayed locked in my classroom, the dim light of the overhead bulb flickering like a dying star. The shadows seemed to pulse around me, and every so often, I saw her, a faint, ghostly figure watching me from the mist-shrouded windows. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Morning light bled through the fog, pale and sickly, but I didn't feel any relief. I was a prisoner now, caged by fog, rules, and something far darker than I could comprehend. And somewhere, in that mist, she was waiting for me. The fog was a living thing in Hollow Creek. It coiled around the twisted trees, slithered through the streets, and pressed against the school's windows like pale, ghostly hands. It never left, never thinned. Day after day, it clung to the town, a suffocating shroud. And somewhere in that fog, she waited, the girl in the blue dress. Sleep had become a distant memory. I stayed at the school most nights, the dim light of my classroom barely enough to keep the darkness at bay. My phone had become useless. No signal, no way to call for help. Even if I managed to leave a message, who would believe me? I was trapped. The other teachers moved like shadows through the halls, their faces pale, their eyes empty. No one spoke of the rules. No one spoke of the whispers. But I could see the fear in their eyes, the same fear that gnawed at me. Daniel's warning echoed in my mind, one in, one out. Was that really the only way? Did I have to condemn someone else to escape this place? I refused to believe it. There had to be another way. I tried questioning Principal Hargrove again, but her response was always the same. Follow the rules, Miss Foster. It's the only way. It was as if the woman had resigned herself to this twisted existence, clinging to those cursed rules like a lifeline. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I began searching the school, looking for any clues, any hint of how this horror had begun. The library was a cold, silent place, its shelves lined with dusty, forgotten books. In the farthest corner, I found a narrow door, half hidden behind a bookshelf. It was locked, but the wood was old and weak. A few desperate pushes, and it gave way with a groan. Beyond it, a narrow staircase spiraled down into darkness. I hesitated, a cold sweat prickling my skin, but I couldn't turn back now. My phone's flashlight barely pierced the shadows as I descended. The air grew damp, the scent of mildew thickening. The whispers returned, faint at first, then rising, a distant, echoing murmur. My pulse quickened. I had to know. I had to understand. At the bottom of the stairs was a small, stone chamber, an old storage room, perhaps. But it was what hung on the walls that made my blood freeze. Dozens of faded photographs, children's faces, pale and expressionless. Some I recognized from my classroom. Others were older, clothed in outdated, worn uniforms. And at the center, a single photograph framed in dusty glass. A girl in a blue dress, her face blurred, her hollow eyes staring directly at the camera. I reached out, my trembling fingers brushing against the glass. Suddenly, a chilling voice whispered directly in my ear. Do you see now? She always returns. I spun around, but the chamber was empty. My heart thundered in my chest. I needed to get out now. I stumbled back up the stairs, bursting into the library's cold, musty air. But as I stepped out, I realized I wasn't alone. Principal Hargrove stood by the doorway, her cold, dead eyes fixed on me. "You shouldn't be here, Miss Foster," she whispered, her voice a brittle whisper. "Some truths are better left buried." The girl, Emily Harper, she's the one in the blue dress, isn't she? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. She's the reason for the rules. Hargrove's face twisted with something between fear and sorrow. She is a fragment of what she once was, a remnant of the darkness we tried to contain. Contain, I repeated. You mean in prison? You all trapped her here. Her expression hardened. You don't understand. We didn't create the rules to trap her. We created them to protect ourselves. But my anger overpowered my fear. You're all just feeding her, sacrificing teachers, students, anyone who breaks your cursed rules. Hargrove's hand trembled, her voice wavering. It is not a choice, Miss Foster. It is survival. A loud crash echoed from the hallway, followed by a distant, desperate scream. The whispers surged, a storm of voices clawing at the walls. "No, not again," Hargrove muttered, fear distorting her face. She turned, running toward the sound. My legs moved before I could think. I followed her through the winding corridors. Shadows twisted against the walls, and the flickering lights seemed to dim with every step. We reached the east wing, doors swinging open and shut, the air thick with cold, suffocating mist. The whispers became screams, panicked pleading. I saw them, figures shifting in the mist, pale, empty-eyed children reaching out with skeletal hands. And there she was, Emily, the girl in the blue dress, standing in the center of the chaos, her gaze empty, her lips twisted in a smile that didn't belong on a child's face. A teacher, a young man I barely recognized, was caught in her grasp, his face twisted in horror as he struggled. But his body seemed to wither, his skin paling, his eyes darkening until he simply faded, his form melting into the mist. "Stop it," I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the cacophony. Principal Hargrove grabbed my arm, yanking me back. "You can't stop her. Get away." But I wrenched free. "I won't just watch this happen." Emily's head turned, her hollow eyes locking onto me. My blood turned to ice. Her mouth twisted, and the whispers grew louder, an unbearable, maddening roar. Something gripped my arm, cold, spectral hands clawing at my skin. I screamed, stumbling back. But then, Daniel appeared, his small form standing between me and the mist. "Leave her alone," he shouted, his voice desperate. For a brief, terrible moment, the fog seemed to recoil. Emily's form wavered, her face twisting with something like confusion. The mist swirled violently, and then, just as suddenly as it had come, it vanished, pulling back into the shadows. The hallway was silent again. Principal Hargrove lay on the floor, gasping for breath. Daniel was gone. Where is he? I cried, stumbling forward. Daniel. But there was only silence. The fog had taken him. Hargrove's voice was a faint whisper. "He saved you just like before, but he can't keep doing it." "What do you mean?" I demanded, panic clawing at me. "What do you mean just like before?" She struggled to stand, her pale face filled with an empty sorrow. "He was the first Miss Foster, the first child Emily took. But his spirit, somehow, he fights against her. He tries to save those he can. But every time, he grows weaker." My heart shattered. Daniel, a ghost, forever trying to save the living from becoming like him. I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. There has to be a way to end this, to free him, to free them all. Hargrove shook her head. We've tried everything. The rules, they are our last defense. But as I looked down the empty, shadowed corridor, an idea began to form, a desperate, dangerous idea. Maybe the rules weren't meant to keep Emily away. Maybe they were meant to keep something else in. But if that was true, then the answer wasn't in following the rules. It was in breaking them. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the windows of the school like a living, suffocating presence. My mind raced, and my heartbeat thundered in my chest as Principal Hargrove's words echoed in my ears. We've tried everything. The rules, they are our last defense. But that couldn't be true. The rules weren't protecting anyone. They were feeding her. Emily, the ghost in the blue dress, and Daniel. He was just a child, trapped between this world and whatever darkness Emily had become. If following the rules kept the darkness at bay, then maybe breaking them would shatter this cursed cycle. I waited until the halls were empty, the whispers nothing more than faint murmurs slithering through the darkness. Principal Hargrove had retreated to her office, her hollow, despairing eyes refusing to meet mine. The other teachers seemed to drift through the school like shadows, too terrified to acknowledge what lurked just beyond the fog. But I wasn't going to be another prisoner here. I wasn't going to watch another child vanish, swallowed by the mist. I stood before the bulletin board, staring at the yellowed sheet of paper, the list of rules that had dictated my every move since arriving in this nightmare. 1. Students must be in their seats 5 minutes before class begins. 2. No one is allowed in the East Wing after 4 p.m. 3. Never acknowledge the girl in the blue dress. 4. If you hear whispering from the closet, do not open it. 5. Under no circumstances should any teacher leave before 5 p.m. My gaze lingered on the third rule. Never acknowledge the girl in the blue dress. That was it. That was the key. She thrived on being ignored, on being treated like a curse instead of a child. But if she was once human, then there had to be something left of her, something trapped in that darkness. I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling. I grabbed my coat, flashlight, and a piece of chalk from the classroom drawer. The whispers seemed to intensify, as if they knew what I was planning. The clock read 3:58 p.m., 2 minutes until the East Wing was off limits. I stepped into the hallway, the air thick with a cold, unnatural chill. The lights flickered, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe. The fog outside pressed harder against the windows, its pale tendrils scratching against the glass. I reached the door to the East Wing just as the clock struck 4 p.m. The whispers grew louder, clawing at my ears, but I forced myself forward. I pushed open the door, and the world seemed to change. The hallway stretched, the walls closing in, the darkness deepening. The air grew frigid, and a pale mist began to seep through the cracks in the walls. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The lights above me sputtered and died, leaving only the weak, ghostly glow of my flashlight. But even that seemed to flicker, struggling against the suffocating darkness. And then I saw her. Emily stood at the far end of the hallway, her blue dress stained and tattered, her hair hanging in matted, tangled curls. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her hollow eyes seemed to pierce through me. "Emily," I whispered, my voice steady despite the terror gnawing at me. "I see you." The whispers exploded into a cacophony, and the mist surged forward, slamming into me like a wave. but I didn't look away. You were a child once, weren't you? I said, my voice louder now, cutting through the shrieking whispers. They hurt you. They let you become this. Her head tilted, her hollow eyes flickering with something. Anger? Sadness? I couldn't tell. You're not a monster, Emily. You're a prisoner, just like me. Her form seemed to waver, the mist curling around her, twisting into ghastly faces. Other children, their empty eyes staring, their mouths open in silent screams. But I took a step forward, the chalk clutched tightly in my hand. I'm breaking your rules, Emily, I whispered, because I'm not afraid of you. I'm here to help you. The mist roared, surging toward me, but I quickly dropped to the floor, using the chalk to draw a rough circle around me. I didn't know if it would work, but I remembered something I'd read once. Old symbols, protective marks, anything to separate me from the darkness. Emily's form lunged, her hands stretching toward me, but she froze at the edge of the chalk circle, her face twisting with fury. Why can't you leave, Emily? I demanded. What's keeping you here? Her voice was a faint, distorted whisper. They promised I could go home. My heart raced. Who promised, Emily? Who trapped you? Her face twisted, her form flickering, and for a brief moment, she looked like a normal child. Wide, tear-filled eyes, trembling lips. The woods, they called me. They said I could see Mama again. And then the mist exploded with fury, her form stretching, twisting, her face a mask of rage and despair. I scrambled back, my back slamming against the cold, damp wall. But a new voice cut through the chaos. A small, trembling voice. Emily. Daniel's voice, faint but desperate. Emily, stop. She's trying to help you. Daniel's form appeared beside her, his ghostly figure barely holding shape. His small, pale hand reached out, touching hers. We can leave, Emily. We can both leave, but you have to let go. Her form trembled, the darkness around her pulsing violently. I watched, frozen, as Daniel's light seemed to spread, pushing back the mist, burning away the shadows. I'm sorry, so sorry, Emily whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't mean to hurt them. Daniel's ghostly face smiled, a tear slipping down his pale cheek. I know, but we can be free now. The mist exploded, a blinding light surging from Daniel and Emily's forms. I shielded my eyes, feeling a rush of cold air, the whispers twisting into a final, fading scream. When the light faded, I was alone in the dark hallway. The mist was gone. The air was cold but calm. The oppressive weight had lifted. I staggered back, barely able to breathe, and stumbled out of the east wing. The school was silent, the fog outside thinning, pale sunlight beginning to break through. Principal Hargrove stood in the main hallway, her eyes wide with shock. What did you do? I freed them. I whisper, my voice breaking. Emily and Daniel. They were never meant to stay. Her face twisted, a mixture of anger and relief. You don't understand what you've done. But I didn't care. I walked past her, pushing open the front doors. The fog was gone. The misty, suffocating darkness had vanished, replaced by a clear, pale sky. And as I stepped outside, the twisted, eerie silence of Hollow Creek seemed to fade. Birds chirped in the distance. I breathed in the cold, fresh air. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Something still lingered here. Something tied to the woods that had lured Emily. I wasn't free yet, but I had given them peace. For now, that was enough. I thought it was over. I thought freeing Emily and Daniel would break the curse that had poisoned Hollow Creek. But freedom is a fragile thing, a fleeting breath in a world that still held its secrets. The fog had lifted, and the school was quiet. Principal Hargrove's fearful eyes watched me from the doorway, but I ignored her. I needed to leave, to escape. But as I reached the edge of town, I felt it, the cold, suffocating chill. The sunlight above seemed pale, struggling against a thickening mist on the horizon. Hollow Creek wasn't letting me go. My car roared to life, but as I sped down the twisting road, the trees loomed, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. The road seemed endless, the mist thickening, pressing against my windshield. My heartbeat raced, my hands gripping the wheel. I should have been out of town by now, but the road just continued, the forest growing darker, the mist thicker. And then, without warning, I slammed the brakes. The road ended, vanished into a swirling, churning wall of fog. My own face stared back at me, distorted in the misty reflection on the windshield. I threw open the door, stumbling out, the cold air biting against my skin. The trees loomed, their twisted forms almost skeletal, and the fog pulsed, a silent heartbeat in the air. No, this can't be happening, I whispered, backing away. But a faint, familiar voice drifted through the mist. You freed them, but you didn't free yourself. I spun around. Principal Hargrove stood there, her form wavering in the pale mist. Her face was lined with shadows, her eyes empty. You thought releasing Emily would end this, but she was only a fragment of the darkness. What are you talking about? I demanded, the panic clawing at my chest. This town, Hollow Creek, it's a trap, a prison, but not just for her, for all of us. The mist twisted, and I saw them, figures moving in the fog, their faces pale, their eyes dark hollows, teachers, students, visitors, dozens of them. And beyond them, the trees stretched, their twisted forms shifting, moving, almost alive. It started with Emily, Hargrove whispered. But the darkness in the woods, it's older. It reaches out, pulls in the lost, the forgotten. It gives them a chance to escape, but at a price. My mind raced, the cold gnawing of my bones. The rules, they were just a way to survive, to feed it, to keep it satisfied. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. The town feeds the darkness, and the darkness feeds on us. My pulse thundered. I turned, staring into the fog. Somewhere in there, I could hear them, whispers, faint and pleading. But beneath them was something else, a low, rumbling growl, a hunger that I could feel in my bones. But I freed them. I shouted, panic rising. I broke the rules. I ended this. No, Hargrove whispered, stepping back. You angered it. The mist exploded forward, twisting around me. Icy fingers clawing at my skin. I screamed, stumbling back. Faces twisted in the fog. Emily, Daniel, the other children, reaching for me, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. I ran. The forest closed around me, the fog pressing in, the darkness deepening. Branches clawed at my skin, the cold gnawed at my bones. I didn't know where I was going, just away from the whispers, the shadows, the hunger. But the mist followed, a living thing, swirling, twisting, and then a clearing. A pale, sickly moonlight broke through the trees, and there, in the center, stood an ancient, twisted tree, its bark blackened, its roots clawing at the earth. A shadow pulsed within it, a darkness that seemed to breathe, to shift. And I knew this was it, the heart of the curse, the darkness that had taken Emily, that had twisted the town. I stepped forward, the mist recoiling, but the whispers grew louder, pleading warning. Stop, please, don't look at it. But I was done running. I grabbed the piece of chalk from my pocket, the one I'd used to protect myself before, and began drawing a circle around the tree. The whispers twisted into screams, the fog slamming against an invisible barrier. But the darkness in the tree began to ripple, shifting, a face pressing against the twisted bark, eyes that seemed to open, empty and endless. My hands trembled, the chalk scraping against the dirt. If this is your prison, then I'll seal it for good. The whispers screamed, and the ground trembled. The faces in the mist twisted, clawing at the barrier of the circle. But I continued, finishing the chalk line. And then I spoke the only words I could think of, the only prayer I knew. You have no power here. You are bound. You are sealed. The darkness within the tree surged, a shriek tearing through the night. The mist pulsed, then collapsed, drawn into the twisted branches, the shadows twisting and writhing. The faces melted, the whispers fading. The tree seemed to shudder, its black bark cracking, splintering, until silence. I sank to my knees, gasping for air. The mist had vanished, the forest silent. Pale moonlight washed over the clearing, and the oppressive chill was gone. I turned, and in the distance, the pale rooftops of Hollow Creek peeked through the trees. The fog had lifted. The sky was clear. I made my way back, my legs shaking, my breath ragged. As I stepped back onto the cracked streets, I saw them. People emerging from their homes, blinking at the clear sky, tears streaming down their faces. Principal Hargrove stood by the school's gate, her expression one of awe and disbelief. It's over, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't respond. I just walked, past the houses, past the school, past the place that had been my prison. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of town, where the road stretched into the mistless horizon. But as I stepped forward, a cold wind whispered against my ear, a faint, distant voice. One and one out. My heart skipped, and I spun around. The town was quiet, the mist gone. But I saw it, just for a moment, a figure standing in the shadow of the trees, watching me. A child, a girl in a blue dress. Her hollow eyes stared into mine, and then she vanished. The darkness wasn't gone. It was just waiting, and I was free, but not safe. Not yet.